Hello watchers, welcome back to the channel and to this head-to-head video. Now I haven't done one of these in a while because I really want to do it against appropriate watches, and I think these are actually appropriate comparisons. So on the left today we have the Seiko SRPA21, otherwise known as the Paddy Turtle, and on the left we have the Steinhart Ocean Vintage Military. These are both around the $400 mark dive watches, one Japanese, one Swiss German of course. They both have 316L stainless steel cases, screw-in case backs and crowns with great water resistance, 200 meters for the Seiko, 300 meters for the Steinhart, 120 click unidirectional dive style bezels, and great lume, the Seiko LumiBright Super Luminova for the Steinhart. They both perform fantastically well, but at the same time they represent quite different approaches and value propositions to these dive watches at this price point. Now, the Seiko, I have to say, is listed at $550 US, but really you're going to get it for around the $360 mark at most retailers, including at Amazon, for example. The Steinhart is listed at 380 euros, and that's about 440 USD in today's exchange rate. And that, of course, will depend on day to day and the time of year. But you won't find this on Joma Shop or Amazon. You have to get it from Steinhart or from their main online retailer, Nomen Watches. Okay, so let's get into the particular face-to-face between these two watches. So starting up with the movement, what we have here is the Seiko 4R36 Japanese movement at 21,600 beats per hour, and on the left we have actually the ETA 2824-2, that very ubiquitous, widely used, very well known and reliable Swiss ETA movement, 28,800 beats per hour. Similar power reserve, Japanese versus Swiss. The ETA is capable of COSC certification and regulation. This one, of course, it isn't actually a COSC chronometer, but the Seiko, I don't think is actually capable of achieving that standard, and I'm not aware that it's ever been sent for COSC. Certainly the Grand Seiko movements can exceed COSC standards, but this one isn't chronometer standard, so I have to give the nod to the Steinhart here. 8 I've given, and 7 for the Seiko. Design. Okay, so in this case, I've given the nod to the Seiko, 9 to the Seiko, 8 to the Steinhart. I think they're both great designs. I think the Seiko just edges out on being original, and really somewhat audacious with that cushion turtle case. And it is Seiko's design. This is really a reimagining, reissue of an earlier turtle style, from the late 70s, I think, when they first released that older original vintage turtle. The Steinhart is very well executed, I have to say. Really, it is a quality watch, but ultimately it is an homage. It is an homage to a vintage Rolex military diver, the 5517. So, I think, yes, it's great styling, but because it is a borrowed design, I have to knock off a little bit for that. So I've given the nod to the Seiko on the design. Okay, quality. Right. In this case, I think the execution of the Steinhart really has to win it. Really, it's, you're getting a dome sapphire. Look at the solidity of how they've beveled out that bezel there. The finishing of the case and the bracelet is really quite impeccable. I think the case back is a better case back. It's got that solid looking thing, and it's got that engravement. I think all over, and also just to mention, it's got screw links for the bracelet at this price point, whereas the Seiko remains a pin adjustment. The Seiko, I think, really, you can't go wrong with the Seiko. It is great quality, but the bezel is slightly weak. The bracelet, I think, is not as strong as the Steinhart. Even though it's got the push button release here and it's got the suit extension, I don't think it quite matches up to the Steinhart in quality. So I have to give the 8 to the Steinhart and the 7 to the Seiko. You could go 9 and 8, whatever the case is. I think the differential goes to the Steinhart for quality. Right, styling. I think this is subjective, and for me, I can't separate them. I think the Seiko has a much loved turtle case. It really, I like it. I really like the look of this particular design and case and the style that it brings. I think the Steinhart obviously is a Submariner design, oyster bracelet, oyster case, that Rolex style bezel. It is borrowed, but in terms of the overall style, it is also a very good looking watch. So I haven't separated these two. I've given 8 to both the Seiko and to the Steinhart in this case. Performance. Okay, now this is probably the most difficult and perhaps the most controversial one. I haven't separated them. I've given 8 to both. And let me just explain that the Seiko is ISO 6425 certified. You can see that by the fact that it's got a diver's 200 meter above the 6 o'clock marker there. So it does meet the standards. So it is tough. It is absolutely will perform as a dive watch. It's got great lume. It's got a bezel that will function with the timing requirement. And, it's got also, you can see there, let me just demonstrate. It's got that suit extension, right? It's got that dive suit extension on the bracelet, which the Steinhart does not have. So that adds to its functionality. But let me say, why have I given the Steinhart an equal? Well, it is not ISO certified, but I think most people will think that a high quality made watch will very, very likely meet the standards if it was subjected to it. The Steinhart also has 300 meters as opposed to 200 for the Seiko. It does have a sapphire glass. That one's Hardlex crystal, not sapphire. And it really has as good a quality or even better in terms of case toughness in comparison to the Seiko. So really, I've not separated it in comparison. The Steinhart also has Super Luminova as opposed to Seiko Lumibright. Now, Seiko Lumibright is fantastic, but on a head-to-head direct comparison, take a look at my watch lume video if you want more information. I think Super Luminova still edges out even against something as good as Lumibright. Okay, so next, versatility. I've given a nod to the Steinhart here. 7 to the Seiko. It works. And I have worn this to the office where I wear a tie. It's not that thick. It is 13.4 millimeters on thickness, so you can get your sleeve over it, or at least I can, because my sleeves are not particularly tight. But a lot of the turtles are a little bit colorful. This one has a Pepsi dial. There is I think a Batman style bezel. Maybe some of the other ones, like the 775 in black, is a little bit quieter. But they have a slight, I guess, more casual feel to it. Whereas this, this of course borrows from Submariner style. It is definitely a quieter watch, slightly thinner. I think there's 0.5 millimeter in it. Black, quiet gray there. So I think in terms of versatility in more formal occasions, you have to say the Steinhart is slightly more versatile, I think. So 8 versus 7 there. Durability. Again, I don't think we can separate these two. They both have 316L steel. The bezels are not ceramic, they're steel. The Seiko, I think, has a more overbuilt case. The case has just more thickness to it, I imagine, compared to the Steinhart case. But they're both, really tough feeling watches. The Steinhart maybe should get a slight edge because it does have the sapphire crystal, whereas this one does not. But I think because of they're both really built quite solidly, I don't think I can really separate this category. 8 for both in durability. Value. Okay, so this is one of the main separators here. I think Seiko is, at this price, fantastic value. Less than 400 USD, you can pick up a really solidly built, nicely styled dive watch that will function and that has a very classic look and that has a reliable movement. The 4R36, I think, is starting to prove itself to be really quite reliable, and it will just go and go and probably not require servicing for years on end. I think that will likely prove to be the case. I think it has only really been around for about 5 or 6 years, but I think, let's see what time tells with regards to the Seiko. But, I think for this price point, Swiss movement, sapphire crystal, super luminova, screw links for the bracelet instead of pin, just the execution that you're getting, the craft, the finishing. I don't think you can really easily beat that. I've given it a 10 out of 10. You could argue it's 9 versus 7 or 9 versus 8, whatever the case is. I think you really have to give the nod to the Steinhart here. It is fantastic value for this price point. Okay, brand. Have to give it to Seiko. Seiko being around as long as they have, the innovations they've brought to the watch industry, even with quartz, with Grand Seiko, Spring Drive, whatever you want to name, they've been around. They are a household worldwide name, known throughout. I've given 8 out of 10 for the Seiko. I've given 7 for Steinhart. Steinhart's relatively new. The name has been around longer, but they've really only been making watches in the recent years, so they're not as well known, so the brand name isn't quite there. I've given 7 out of 10 for the Steinhart. X Factor. Right, again, I think I have to give it to the Seiko. This design really has a fanatical following. If you follow the forums and whatnot, people just love the turtle. I mean, there are other designs in the Seiko range which are much loved, the SKX, the monsters, the tunas. The turtle is really seemingly right up there with those classic designs. So in terms of just being well known and famous and much loved, I think the X Factor goes with Seiko, along with the brand as well, in terms of the strength of this watch. I think the Steinhart is a special homage. It's the Rolex 5517, a watch that really goes for over 100 grand on good condition vintage. So it's a homage to a watch that you otherwise might not be able to get, and it really is really good looking, really well executed. So I've given it an 8 out of 10, maybe a bit more than it deserves, but I think fair enough. I've given the nod to the Seiko. What's the total? You've been counting, so you probably get a feel. Just an edge out to the Steinhart, 79 versus 80 for this particular head-to-head comparison. So in summary, 2 excellent dive watches, different sectors of the world market. Swiss, German, Japanese, but you can get them from anywhere in the world really. They both represent, I think, excellent value propositions at this $400 price point. The Seiko won out on design, brand prestige, and particularly X Factor, but I think overall Steinhart edged out in several more categories. The movement, overall quality, versatility, and just sheer value. 10 out of 10 I've given that. So there we have it. That's a comparison between the Seiko Turtle Paddy and the Steinhart Ocean Vintage Military. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have these watches and your experience with them. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this. Give us a like, guys, and subscribe to keep in touch. And as always, I will catch you next time.